So, hello class. Today we're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution. So, who can tell me what a revolution is? Kenzie?
It is a change of some sort.
Okay, a change. Is it a big change, a little change? Does it happen quick? Is it slow?
I think it's a big change, but I don't know the speed of it.
Okay, so revolutions tend to be quick in terms of a big time scale. So they tend to happen quicker rather than taking a long time. And it's also a great change. So it's not a small change. It's a really, really big change. It has a really big effect on usually a lot of different things. So an important thing to note, though, revolutions don't always have to be violent. Okay, they're not always a war. They don't always involve governments fighting against each other. And today we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution, which is actually an example of a peaceful revolution. And so we're going to start by watching a quick little video to give you guys a quick overview of the Industrial Revolution. So pay attention to the impact the revolution had, pay attention to what made the Industrial Revolution happen, and how it changed people's lives.
The revolution is in the making, which will change the lives of every human being on the planet. The Industrial Revolution. For 100,000 years, mankind has made tools to overcome the limits of the human body and extend our control over the natural world. But they relied on muscle power. Now mankind develops a tool with potentially unlimited power. The key to the modern world, the machine.
This is a revolutionary transformation. It changed the way people live.
Today, we live in a world that's so full of products, it's hard for us to imagine what life was like before machines.
The north of England, 1768. Richard Arkwright. Self-taught, ambitious, a natural entrepreneur.
The root of civilization is the driving motivation of certain people at certain times to create something new. Something drives certain people that's not in most of us.
Arkwright's goal is to create a machine to stretch and spin cotton perfectly. John Kay, clockmaker, brings the skills of the precision engineer. The two men work at night and in secret. Neighbors suspect they're practicing witchcraft. But the device they're making will give birth to the age of industry and the consumer society.
Now you begin to get a whole group of people who can afford to get products that once upon a time were really only available to the wealthy.
We can now enjoy things that we could never have before. We can eat things, wear things, play with things. We can produce so much more stuff, and almost all of this stuff is what people actually want.
Arkwright's machine turns raw cotton into thread more efficiently than any human being. He becomes the world's first industrial tycoon. And creates a new kind of workplace, the factory. Giant water-powered factories rise across the countryside. Cotton production in England skyrockets in 20 years. From 227,000 pounds spun by hand to 7.2 million pounds spun by machine.
the invention of the factory and industrial capitalism were the most revolutionary transformations in the history of civilization.
By 1850, England has 4,000 factories.
All right, so to recap the video, pull back our PowerPoint presentation real quick. All right, so how did humans make things, especially tools, before the Industrial Revolution?
By hand.
By hand, right, good. So what invention changed that during the revolution? The word starts with an M, it's a pretty broad term. What was invented during the Industrial Revolution that changed how humans made things?
Machine.
Machines, right, good. So before the Industrial Revolution, things tended to be handmade, okay? They took a lot more time, a lot more effort, a lot more skill. Then machines came along in the Industrial Revolution and really spurred a new way of making products, okay? How did the machines change the amount of things being made? Did we make less? Did we make more? Did we make the same?
Made way more.
Made way more, right, good. And finally, what type of building came about during the Industrial Revolution? Where did they put these machines?
And like water-powered factories.
Right, factories, good. A lot of them were water-powered. So again, machines came about during the Industrial Revolution that changed things from being handmade to machine-made. We made a lot more of a product and a lot more products because of machines, and those machines were housed in factories. Now, as we go throughout the rest of the lesson today, our objectives, we're going to introduce the Industrial Revolution, so you guys are going to get a broad idea of what the Industrial Revolution was, which we just accomplished with the video and the questions. We're going to explain how it began in America and what it brought to America in terms of factories and a new way of producing things, okay? It's a new style of production. And finally, we're going to briefly describe the life people lived that worked in factories and what it was like to work in factories day to day. So, to begin, the Industrial Revolution began in America in the early 1800s. In the mid-1700s, the English experienced the beginnings of their Industrial Revolution, and that Industrial Revolution came to America about 50 years later in the beginning of the 1800s. Okay, again, it's important to note, just because it has the word revolution does not mean it was a violent war. It was a long, slow process that took place over about 100 years' time, okay? And finally, it was spurred by technological innovation. An example of that is a machine called the spinning jenny, which is pictured here. Okay, it's a really big machine, and that's why, again, they had to build special buildings for these machines. They tended to be large. This is very similar to the invention we saw in the video. Its goal was to spin cotton into thread better than humans could, quicker and more efficiently, okay? Can you guys think of any examples from back then or modern day that are similar, that really spurred new ways of doing things because of the technological innovation? Kinsey?
Smartphones.
Smartphones, right. So before smartphones, none of us had internet unless we were in front of a computer or a laptop, usually at home or in like a computer lab, right? Well, now, if I put my phone in my pocket, I have the internet in front of me, which means I can do things like bank, I can trade stocks, I can send emails, I can look up information, all because of a smartphone, right? So that technological innovation really changed the way that we live our lives, right? The machines in the Industrial Revolution did the same thing, but on an even bigger scale. Okay, so any questions on any of the info presented here? Began in the early 1800s. It was a long, slow process. It didn't have any violence, and it was spurred on by technological innovation. Does anybody have a question? All right, sweet. So moving forward, these new machines brought about a new style of production, a new system of production, and that's called the factory system. Okay, the factory system was brought to America mainly by a man named Samuel Slater. Samuel was an Englishman, okay, he's from Britain, and Britain actually passed a law during its Industrial Revolution that people were not allowed to bring ideas outside of England because the English government wanted to protect its Industrial Revolution and make as much money as they could without letting other countries take advantage, right? Now, Mr. Slater, he grew up working in factories, so he didn't have to take any plans with him or leave the country with products because he had it all memorized, okay? So Mr. Slater leaves England and comes to New York City and meets a man named Moses Brown in Rhode Island. And in Rhode Island, he helped Moses Brown create a factory that made textiles or clothing, And together, those two were sort of the first big success in the American Industrial Revolution. So again, with the spinning jenny and textile production, that's one example of how factories were used to change the production methods. So what entrepreneurs would do is they would start a factory or a mill, and they would get a bunch of these machines that made it easy to produce a product. So in this case, in the spinning jenny, it's yarn, right? A bunch of pure cotton, and they would spin that cotton into yarns of thread, okay? And because of the machines, they were able to produce a lot more and produce it cheaply, which increased their profits. The last big component of the factory system of production was interchangeable parts. Does anyone know what the word interchangeable means?
Easily swapped out.
Right, great. So interchangeable means I can easily swap it with another equal piece, okay? Before interchangeable parts, if someone made a gun, the trigger made for that gun only worked on that gun. I couldn't take that trigger and put it on a new gun, right? Which that made it very hard to produce mass quantities of goods and made goods very expensive. So a man named Eli Whitney came up with the idea that I want to make parts for guns that I can put together like a puzzle and it will work every single time. So he went to Washington, D.C. and sold his idea to the government, and from there, interchangeable parts became a big part of the factory system production process. Now, really important to note, factories are not cheap, okay? It's very expensive to start factories, and as we'll learn later, the way that many Americans started their factories was through a strong banking system that allowed them to borrow money, okay? But factories are not cheap to start at all. Finally, factories were built in places that natural resources could help power them, okay? So electricity at this time wasn't widely used or very cheap or anything like that. So they built their factories near places that had power sources. So in the north, you have a lot of rivers and streams and running water. So they built textile factories, and textile is another word for clothing. They built textile factories that would be placed near water, and the water would help power the machines inside the factory. Okay, the water's energy. In Pennsylvania, where there's a lot of forests and a lot of wood, they built iron ore factories, which help make steel. Because in the steel factories and the steel mills, the wood in Pennsylvania could be converted to charcoal, which could then be used for power. Okay, so it's really important to understand the factories being built were built in the places they were built to make it easier for the factory's machines to be powered. And finally, it was so important to have the power of natural resources that investors would build dams and canals to help steer resources in the right direction. So if I want to build my factory on a piece of land here, but the closest river is 5 miles away, I'm going to build a dam and a canal to steer that river towards my factory so that I have the power I need to make products. So with factories and mills came jobs, okay? Before factories and mills, most Americans worked in farms or on farms, okay? Now farms, I don't know how many of you farm here, but farmers tend to not have set hours. They work roughly sun up to sundown. They don't have daily or weekly wages. They get paid based on the harvest and how well the crop goes and what the prices are. With factories, that changed. Okay, with factories, most factories began their days at 4 a.m. with a whistle, and most factories ended their day around 6 or 7 p.m. with a whistle. Okay, and every day from 4 a.m. to 6 p.m. you're going to show up to work and you're going to work the same amount of hours, and you're going to make the same amount of money. Some people got paid daily, some got paid weekly, but again, this is different because before this, it was a farming system, so you got paid when the harvest came in. Okay, another new part of jobs with factories and mills, children and women were hired. The most important reason that children and women were hired was that they were cheaper to hire than grown men. At this time, women were not as highly respected in the workforce as they are today. And we'll learn more about that in a couple weeks when we talk about social reforms and things like that. But women were cheaper to hire, and so were children, okay? And if I'm the boss and I want to make as much money as I can, the less I have to pay my workers, the more money I make. So I'm going to hire a lot more women and children, and we'll also see that gave women a new voice in politics and in society that they didn't previously have. A specific example of what factory jobs did for small communities across the country was Lowell, Massachusetts. In 1821, Lowell was a community of 5 farm families. Okay, that was the whole town. 15 years later, in 1836, the town had over 36,000 people in it because of a factory that was built in Lowell. So this video is about that town, and again, it's about a 4-minute video.
Based on a new machine, the Power Loom.
1 second here. If I can get it pulled up for you guys.
Raw cotton, based on a new machine, the Power Mill. Raw cotton comes in, finished cloth goes out, all under one roof. The modern factory is born. Lowell, Massachusetts is called the City of Spindles, a textiles boomtown. Population explodes from 200 in 1820 to nearly 20,000 in just 15 years. More than a third of the town works in the mills. 85% are single women between 15 and 25. Harriet Robinson is 10. When her father dies, she goes to work at the mill.
I can see myself now, racing down the alley, between the spinning frames, and carrying in front of me a bobbin box, bigger than I was.
Women earn money for the first time. Harriet's wages help support her family. Industrialization is changing everyone's lives.
Oh, the mill girls make good use of their money. The mortgage is lifted from the homestead, the farmhouse is painted. Mill girls help maintain widowed mothers and drunken or invalid fathers. We were paid $2 a week. Oh, how proud I was when it came to my turn to stand upon the bobbin box.
When women really joined the workforce in the cotton mills and the thread factories, I think it gave women an opportunity to get out, be serious about being breadwinners, and it changed the whole fabric of America.
The mills also revolutionized how Americans dress. Mass production of cheap cotton fabrics spawns America's clothing industry. Previously, most families made their own clothes. Now people buy ready-to-wear. Eastern fashions replaced buckskin. By 1850, men's clothing is the largest manufacturing industry in New York City.
For me, what makes me proudest to be an American is that American spirit of productivity, optimism, this idea that the world doesn't have to be doom and gloom, that we can use technology to make our lives better.
Fashion isn't the only innovation to come out of the mills. Technology developed here will lead straight to Silicon Valley. Looms pioneer punch cards to produce patterned fabric. Each hole in the card tells the loom to use a different colored thread. A yes-no decision. It's binary code, the basis of all modern computers. The birth of the computer and internet began in cotton mills with these looms.
You know, in every major development, I think, in the history of America, technology has been at the center of it.
Despite 12-hour shifts, the factories offer a new world of opportunity for women. They're reading more, talking more, educating themselves.
Yeah, reading books on factory time is against the rules. But we hid books in apron pockets and waste baskets. Oh, and sometimes we pasted poems on our looms to memorize.
And for the first time in America, their voices are heard. October 1836. Women from the Lowell mills gather after work and organize. Their protest against wage cuts is one of the first strikes in U.S. history. And they will win. The mill bosses back down. A generation of young women go on to become teachers, writers, and even college graduates. Harriet Robinson will become a leading suffragette and testify before Congress.
Alright, so we got a couple quick questions about that video that we just watched. Alright, so first, how did the mills in Lowell, Massachusetts affect the town's population? It was near the beginning of the video.
A lot of people were moving there because they wanted jobs.
Right. So the mills had jobs, so people were moving to Lowell which made the town's population get really big really fast. How many of the workers in the factories were women?
Most of them.
Right, most of them. Right, a lot of them. The video said 85%. We didn't see any males in that video, right? We only saw females. Again, women were much cheaper and much more available for hire, and so a lot of women got these jobs in these factories. How does Harriet, the girl in the video, say women helped their families when working? What did Harriet say the mill women were able to accomplish by working and earning some money?
Stability in the home and food on the table.
Yeah. So she said mortgages were lifted off the homesteads. People paid for their houses. They were able to paint their houses. She said it helped when mom or dad weren't necessarily pulling their weight. It helped support the family. Did you guys catch how much Harriet made per week?
$2.
Right, $2 a week. Okay, she's working 12-hour shifts. She gets one day off a week, and that's Sunday, so they can go to church. And so six 12-hour shifts, she makes $2 a week. Okay. I just told you guys how many hours the employees worked in the shift, but who can tell me how much is 12 hours of each day? That's half the day, right? Yeah. Okay, so she's working a very long day, 6 days a week. What current technology today did the cotton looms sort of help give birth to? We use it every single day. Computers, right. Okay, so that just shows the Industrial Revolution, when we talk about it as a focused time between roughly 1800 to roughly 1900, right? But technological innovation is always happening throughout history, okay? And it's always helping change society. And then again, we'll talk about reforms later, okay? But like we said previously, the women being able to work in factories gave them a political voice that they hadn't had previously, okay? And if you remember at the very end of the video, they said the women went on strike to fight against wage cuts, okay? That's just one example of how the factory jobs that women were able to get, even though they didn't pay very much and the conditions were bad, it helped women gain a role in society that they didn't previously have. So, you are now a factory worker, okay? Real quick, how would you guys feel if you had to work a 12-hour shift and made $2 a week, which is about $50 today?
Wouldn't work.
Wouldn't work? You wouldn't do it? Okay. Anybody else?
I'd feel hungry.
You feel hungry? Yeah, I agree. I'm there with you. So, real quick, let's go back to this picture here, okay? So this is a factory like the video you guys saw just a second ago in Lowell. Okay, it's a spindle factory. Okay, they make thread, right? So who can tell me how's the factory look? Does it look clean? Does it look dirty? Does it look safe? Dangerous?
Yeah, looks dirty.
Dirty, dangerous.
Looks dirty. Looks dangerous, right? And then if we go back to another slide, it's kind of hard to see, but here I don't know if you guys can tell behind this. There's two kids right here, right? Mm-hmm. And they're standing on a machine barefoot, and they're cleaning the machine, right? Okay, again, these factories were dirty and they were dangerous, but it was a job. Okay, it was a job that people could use to help support their families, and it was too good an opportunity to pass up. So, now, you guys' homework assignment, you are a factory worker, okay? Let's put yourself in the shoes of one of these children, okay? You're one of these young kids. You just got off the job, and you are going to write a letter to home, okay? You can address this letter to home. You can address this letter to a politician. You can address it to a significant other, a spouse, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a regular friend. Write the letter to whoever you want to, but you're going to tell them about your job at the factory, okay? So here's the example that I wrote up. And there's a couple things I really want you to include in your letter, okay? The first thing, I want you to tell me what type of factory you work in, okay? Do you work in a steel mill? Do you work in an iron ore factory? Do you work in a spindle factory? Where do you work, right? And then the next thing I want you to include is your work schedule. Somehow tell me what your work schedule is, okay? So here I said I'm only writing now because it's Sunday, my one day off during the week, right? So that tells them I'm working 6 days a week. During the days that I do work, I spend 12 to 16 hours at the factory before going home. So how many days a week do you work? How long do you work during those days that you do work, okay? So again, what type of factory do you work at? What's your work schedule? I want you to mention what's in your factory, okay? Are there machines? Is it hand work? What do you guys do at your factory? So machines are helpful, but they're dangerous, right? I gave a little story about a 12-year-old friend of mine that lost his hand because they got caught in the machines, right? They're really, really dangerous working conditions. And then tell me what the factory's like, okay? Is the factory clean, dirty, big, small, safe, dangerous, okay? For me, the factory's really gross, okay? The rooms are dark, so we can't see what we're doing very well. The floors are dirty, so we might slip and fall, might get sick from the germs. Factory work's been bad, but at least it's work. And then finally, tell me why you're working. Are you working to send money home? Are you working to go to school? Are you working to pay for your new home that you just got in the big city, right? For me, I'm sending $1 a week home, right? So I'm here in the big city working, sending some money home to my family, okay? Tell me where you're working, right? So I'm in Pittsburgh, okay? Why am I in Pittsburgh? Well, there's a lot of wood in Pittsburgh, so there's an iron ore factory in Pittsburgh, okay? Because they got a lot of wood to power that factory. So, again, tell me what type of factory you're working in. Tell me your work schedule. Tell me something about the stuff that's in your factory, the machines that's in your factory. Tell me what your factory working conditions are like, okay? And then tell me where your factory is and tell me why you're working at the factory. Any questions on your homework assignment?
No, sir.
All right, sweet. It's due tomorrow before class. And we'll pick up tomorrow with our next step in the Industrial Revolution. Thanks. Video.